Bhakti ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaitan. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Bhakti, Manager Medical Affairs, Lupin, and I welcome you all to this very interesting webinar on an overview of trichological therapies from medical management to procedural intervention. Today we have with us our moderator, Dr. Aseem Sharma, who is a Chief Dermatologist at Skin Saga Center for Dermatology at Mumbai. Our speaker and panelist, Dr. Pradeep Kumari, who is a dermatologist, surgeon, and an aesthetic physician at Skin and Surgery International, Pune. Dr. Maya Vedmurthy, who is a consultant dermatologist and aesthetic physician at RSV Skin and Laser Center, Chennai. Dr. Neeraj Pandey, who is a director and senior consultant, Derma Skin Clinic, Derma Clinic, Skin, Laser and Hair Research Clinics, Lucknow, and Dr. Rohit Batra, who is also a consultant dermatologist and aesthetic laser surgeon at Sri Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi. I welcome you all for this webinar. And with this, I hand over the session to Dr. Aseem Sharma. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bhakti, for that warm introduction, and good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us all on a Sunday evening. Today, we have a very interesting topic on hand. We will be discussing about trichology therapeutics. We would be dividing the session into oral, topicals, orals, other interventions, and even some newer trends at the end of the session. So do keep those audience questions flowing in. We'd love to take them up towards the middle and the end of the session. So why trichology therapeutics? Why is that even a topic? We have FDA approved modalities for hair and they seem to respond very well. Now, there are therapeutic need gaps, both with minoxidil in terms of efficacy and how the follicles converted into minoxidil sulfate and actually activate it. Finasteride has its own, its own kitty full with a questionable role in reversing miniaturization and the hoopla around post-finasteride syndrome. There are other medical modalities which we would be covering as well, which essentially means that the FDA-approved modalities that we do use definitely pose a therapeutic need gap. And then we have the whole gambit of procedural trichology, where you have right from platelet concentrates to microneedling, threads, botulinum toxin, hair follicle stem cells, micropigmentation, mesotherapy, and hair transplantation. So we do have a lot of off-label therapies that we use for trichology, and we would be discussing that today. So we'll begin with a talk, which will be an overview on therapeutics in a nutshell. Then we'll come to a panel discussion, which we'll keep very, very practical. We'll discuss when, how, why, and what to use. And we'll take audience questions, like I said, twice during the course of the panel discussion. So without any further ado, I welcome Dr. Pradeep Kumari. She is going to introduce the topic to us, and she's going to take us through an overview of therapies that we use in trichology. I'd request Dr. Pradeep Kumari to take the dais, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Aseem Sharma. Today, as you said, we will be having our talk and basically overview of the hair fall or trichology therapies and the entire gamut of medical and procedural dermatology. As we are slowly back to normal and slightly normal OPDs in the post-COVID era, the second post-COVID wave, I'll briefly, because it is a very wide topic, I'll briefly overview what all is available and how all we are using it. And then, of course, we can move on to the esteemed panel discussion wherein we can have everyone's view. So, let's see. Okay, so when we talk about hair, it is the hair loss component of it which bothers mostly males and females, and that is what they come to us. And why such a big prominent part of dermatology is dedicated to the hair component of it is because whenever hair loss happens in males as well as females, it has a lot of negative social and emotional effects, and males are many at times preoccupied with baldness and they make effort to conceal or compensate for this hair loss. Similarly, in females, it is very devastating and causes a lot of anxiety. They feel helpless and unattractive, and many times it leads to an onset of depression. So whenever we are dealing with hair loss, be it of any diagnosis, we in general importantly would want to follow 4 steps, making the diagnosis, wherein we know that combinations frequently exist and Very frequently we see overlap happening because of various reasons of hair fall. We have to establish baselines and how much how hair is present before we start the treatment, because in this era of social media, the feedbacks and the patients being unhappy, it is very important to later on let patient as well as us know like how the improvement is progressing, choosing a treatment which is of our as well as patients understanding and liking, and then manage it with a measurable feedback. Ideally this measurable feedback should be evidence based. So before we start and go into the therapies, as a clinician we should remember that there are alopecia which would be present to us as episodic telogen effluvium, and actually it is early androgenetic alopecia, and it telogen effluvium, even if we are seeing it in a male or a female, it is many a times a sign of underlying conditions, and it can represent the future patterned baldness. We have to rule out other alopecias. We have to make sure that we are not keeping and skipping cicatricial alopecia or the infections. So whenever we are talking and doing consultations, there are two keywords which we have to remember, that we always should do trichoscopy because that establishes a gap baseline. And I've just written this simply because these are important things before we move on to the therapeutics, and rule out any infections or cicatricial alopecia. A cursory look and then starting the treatment and later on realizing that it was beginning of a cicatricial alopecia is usually embarrassing, and we should always rule it out. Profuse shedding, whether happening because of our medication or in general the patient presentation, we should very well know that where it is starting. Of late, when I mentioned COVID, we are also seeing a lot of complaints of premature entry into telogen phase, where patient would exactly tell us, okay, day 3 of the COVID or 3 weeks after COVID, they started getting hair fall in respect to the telogen effluvium. So these are some of the interacting mechanisms which we should keep in mind. Stress, of course, is pivotal. And when patients come with us with the collected hairs, it puts us in a dilemma. So coming to the therapeutic parts, physical examination should always be done to establish the baselines, doing trichoscopy. Past this slide, all the discussion I would be making in therapeutics is with the assumptions that the infection is taken care of, and we are talking about general alopecia instead of the cicatricial alopecia. So laboratory wise, we should be looking at some of the baseline tests if the history suggests that. And management wise, we all very well know that there is one academician's management, which Dr. Asim Sharma was just mentioning, and a clinician's management. And whether we like it or not, both are hugely different, even if they overlap. And in academician management, FDA approved therapies are very, very limited, and we only know 2 drugs. When it comes to being a clinician, we get put on a pedestal, and we have to look at anything and everything, maybe a drug or a device which would promote or produce hair growth and satisfy us as well as our patients. So anything which would claim to have telogen hairs converted to anagen, hair maintained in anagen, miniaturized hair to convert to terminal hair, further prevention of the miniaturization or increase in hair diameter, anything and everything is welcome. So current treatment options are basically looking at the mitogenic effect of minoxidil, low-level laser therapy, latanoplast, any anti-inflammatory and antioxidants, increasing the hair diameter, looking at the growth factor influence, prolonging the anagen phase, wherein mainly the anti-androgens come in picture, anti-androgens and vasodilators. So let us look at them one by one. And of course, this is what we would want for our patients. So the first and foremost drug we all know is minoxidil, which works by various mechanisms and can be used in conjunction with topical finasteride or oral finasteride or dutasteride. And this is a topical formulation available to us in 2, 5%, 10% strengths. In fact, 12% also is available. The main side effect which we face with the minoxidil is that huge population of young males or females would not want to start them right away, even if the benefits are huge. And we have to convince them to be started on this. Apart from the very variable clinician side effects which we see as hypertrichosis or irritant and allergic contact dermatitis, which is very common with higher alcohol-based formulations, and the industry is very frequently coming up with non-alcoholic or low alcoholic formulations. This contact dermatitis, if at all it is happening, we have to confirm it by patch testing and rule it out. Many patients, especially females, tend to complain of minoxidil-induced headache if we are increasing the strength, and of course we have to take care of the pregnancy and lactation. Similarly, in addition to the minoxidil, we also have topical finasteride, wherein the side effect profile is less, acceptance in the form of if we compare vis-a-vis oral finasteride combination is more, and side effect profile wise, of course the rare ones we don't see, but pre-syncope and scalp irritation is very common. And we also should be aware that even if we're starting a male on finasteride, topical finasteride, we should be making them aware of the possibility of the safe contraception which the partner has to use, or avoiding the donation of blood. We also have minoxidil, finasteride, and the topical Capexil based combinations. Apart from Capexil, I'll just shortly discuss as to what all we have. These are indications wherein we use Capexil or such growth enhancer alone or in combinations, wherein the acceptance becomes easy. And in general, we have seen as clinicians that Capexil formulations tend to reduce the minoxidil based irritations, and the acceptance in general in patients is higher. These preparations also act as step down phenomena when we are trying to wean the patient off the oral formulations of finasteride. Topical finasteride is easily available, not alone. Alone, of course, also we are getting in 1% gel formulation now, but most commonly it is used as in a combination of 0.1% solution along with topical minoxidil. And many times patients are comfortable using topical finasteride compared to oral finasteride. Hair serums, which is a huge market, is basically, apart from these two finasteride and minoxidil combinations of topical lotions. So hair serums are portions of silicon, ceramide, and amino acids. And silicon basically gives a protective covering to the hair shaft. So this way, it basically makes the hair more manageable, does not give the dryness kind of side effect, which typically happens with minoxidil. When we talk of dermatological serums, we have regular serums which act just as conditioners. We also have irritants which come as increased blood flow characteristics so that the nutrient uptake or uptake of the minoxidil based lotions is more, and growth enhancers, which are the mainstay of non-minoxidil lotions. So why we are using this? Because they act on various target areas like activation of hair follicle stem cells, blockade of 5-alpha reductase or transforming growth factor beta pathway, or they help control the hair follicle microinflammation and fibrosis, which is one important mechanism of the hair thinning which happens. So improved follicular vascularization leads to control of hair fall, and mainly prostaglandins, aminoxidil, glycerol diesters, and silicium minerals niacin derivatives come in this category. We also have anti-inflammatory activity controlling molecules which are used in topical formulation, that is ketoconazole and zinc pyrithione, basically the antifungals, and blockage of DHT that happens with sapomato, clover leaf, that is Capexil, or Procapil, that is a formulation of essential fatty acids or amino acids. So these categories in broad we can divide into Capexil based formulations, plant extracts, caffeine or biotin based formulations, and melatonin based formulations. There are huge list of nutritional supplements which have anecdotal growth increase, and they are also used mainly biotin, zinc, copper tripeptides, coenzyme Q10, sapomato, green tea extract, beta sitosterol, rosemary, and such kind of ingredients which are there in plenty in their hair serum formulations. Now coming to oral therapies, oral minoxidil has been being used of late for the indication of dealing with the hair therapeutics. And mechanism of action, we all know it is a potent arterial vasodilator, and in fact this was the side effect from where the antihypertensive drug initially was used in the oral formulation, topical formulations for hair growth. And now we are coming back to a stage where we would want to use it as a mainstay therapy of the hair growth. So when we start, of course, not many of us are using, but gradually we are starting to use it. So when we start with 0.25 mg and gradually increase the dose based on the results, and up to 5 mg can be used. Some people tend to go up to 10 mg, or 6 weeks to 24 weeks is the usually study duration until now. Precautions wise, we have to look at the sodium monitoring, close monitoring for hypotension, cardiologist opinion for cardiac patients. Before you start the drug, we should consider adverse effect of oral minoxidil formulation, which we really want to be aware of when we are starting in the beginning, is cardiovascular side effects, because we would want to avoid the patients who are having ischemic heart diseases or pulmonary hypertension. We would want to take care of the sodium and fluid retention, which can happen leading to congestive cardiac failure. Hypertrichosis is the, of course, very well-known side effect. Pulsating headache is common and it tends to be bothering. Itchy eyes, which can, of course, can happen along with the topical formulations also. Skin rashes and eruption, polymenorrhea. Oral finasteride, this is the mainstay of the FDA approved therapeutics of hair fall treatments, and mechanism we all know is the 5-alpha reductase type 2 inhibitor it is, and main indication is AG and postmenopausal hyperandrogenemia in our population, or the dermatology patients, trichology patients. Strengths available, usually it is 1 milligram daily, and I would like Dr. Asim to take it up when he asked the moderator questions whether in female we usually have to step up to 5 mg, or most of us do see at 1 mg acting very nicely. Precautions to be taken, of course, it requires a lot of counseling simply because patients are well aware and they read about the side effect, and we should mention them beforehand. Donation of blood, strict use of contraception, and limitation of in the childbearing age group in females, we have to avoid it. Adverse effect wise, when we are starting in males, 2 adverse effects which we usually tend to neglect and patients complain is breast tenderness or gynecomastia even in male patients, and also very rarely patients do complain of the depression, and that is something which is literature mentioned, and we have to be very, very aware, because increasingly patients say that my earlier doctor did not take care of it and I was not explained, and that is why they left the doctor. So this is something. Male infertility, of course, various random RCT studies say that it has no correlation, but once it happens in a male and a male says that it is basically because of finasteride, it's very difficult to refute or find out other causes. So we have to be careful in patients who are little choosy about what they would want to use and what they would not want to use. In females, oral spironolactone or ketoconazole, not in oral formulation, but definitely in topical formulations, it tends to help. In oral, it is not worthwhile taking the risk of starting it. Oral dutasteride is one combination wherein we see one molecule wherein we see sometimes because the name is little different, the acceptance even amongst the males is better compared to finasteride, because with finasteride they come with lot of prejudices, even though this is more non-specific inhibitor, and 0.25 mg or 0.5 mg per day can be used. Adverse effects are almost similar to finasteride oral formulations, and erectile dysfunction and loss of libido is commonly complained by the patient, and that we have to make the patient aware about. Talking of drawbacks, main drawback is that the patients, because they've read and they have prejudices, it is difficult to make sure that they use, and compliance tends to be difficult. Compliance with respect to they starting their drug. Once they start, in the group of patients who start, of course, they see good results. That is why they are able to continue. So when we come to the combination of these oral or topical formulations, and when we would want to get up from the chair, we talk about the procedural management, which revolves, of course, highly around the medical management, and the procedural management acts as support of it. So one group of the procedural management is wherein we are doing a OPD based procedure and mainly looking at the hair growth improvement. In that, the hugely popular procedures are platelet-rich plasma therapy, mesotherapy, low-level diode therapy, and some additional therapies which are having good scientific basis and show some good results, but the studies are yet to be supporting it significantly enough. So one of them is use of botulinum toxin type A and the thread-based improvements. Camouflage options like scalp micropigmentation and hair transplant, wherein we are mainly dealing with baldness and not taking care of the hair fall which is currently happening, is the other type of armamentarium. So coming to PRP or platelet-rich plasma therapy, it has been discussed well in last 5-7 years, and we know that it acts by releasing growth factors, prolonging the anagen phase, and it is very effective when we are dealing with short-term telogen effluvium and androgenetic alopecia. The acceptance in patients who are not willing to take topical or oral finasteride or minoxidil is very high, and patient satisfaction ratings also for this treatment is very high, and this is something which is easy to do, less cost involvement or investment option for even dermatologists. So typically the number of sessions done is 1 session per month, and 6 to 8 sessions are done. Post that, the patients go to a maintenance phase where they do it occasionally on the basis of need of every 3 to 4 months or 6 months. Many times we get to see patients wherein once the series of these sessions is completed, they go out of the active phase of androgenetic alopecia for a long time duration. This in addition can be combined if possible with low level LLT therapy, wherein the efficacy tends to increase. Adverse effect wise of PRP, there are very few minor complaints like having pain, post-prick sensation, headache, or minor itching on the day or the next day of the procedure being done. Very rarely, if the sterile precautions are not taken care of, then maybe transient erythema or edema or desquamation can come in picture. Beyond that, it is more or less of a very simple side effect free therapy. Bruising is very rare. PRP in COVID recovered is something which we need to discuss, because these patients are heavily and more and more they are being on the blood thinners, and we have to look at the impact, because in the recent OPDs post-COVID, telogen effluvium has emerged out to be a strong hair fall indicator. LLT is basically low-level diode therapy, and many times it works by using photomodulatory effect. It is one of the FDA-approved therapy, reduces the inflammation, improves the microcirculation, and in both males and females without any hesitation it can be done. However, many times it is said that, or you see that once you start it, especially when you are doing it frequently, patients tend to see telogen effluvium breakout, especially at the beginning, like how we see with the minoxidil, and that tends to put the patients away. Ideally, when we look at it, we should realize that the source of light should be laser, and it can be used in various indications, including the alopecia areata. It is also said to improve graft survival. If we are doing it post hair transplant surgery, ideally it should be done twice a week or alternate day basis for up to 8 to 12 weeks. But typically in our clinics, because patients can't come that frequently, it is done in combination, meaning when the patient is coming for some other indication like PRP, they would get it done only on that day and not as the proposed or the expected therapeutic interval is followed. Mesotherapy is something which has suffered as well as has its own advantages. Basically, there is no standardization, and because the medications which are used are not standard bioactive compounds, and they get various labels. So it is a basically intradermal delivery of various products. Most of these products come labeled as topical application solution. So ideally, we should not be injecting. That's the main drawback of mesotherapy. That is why it has not been able to become mainstay. However, some doctors do use minoxidil as along with microneedling combination and some other bioactive compounds which act as vasodilators, or even finasteride and topical to dustide application is done with the help of minoxidil mesotherapy, so that the absorption is better. And the suggested interval is once a week. This particular therapy, mesotherapy, was more pronouncedly used by clinicians before the era of PRP therapy. Once PRP therapy came into picture, less and less of dermatologists are using mesotherapy. However, in certain scenarios, it does help and can be used. Adverse effect wise, mesotherapy, because we are not very sure how sterile or the nicely packed or um, um, the formulations are. So edema, bruising, pain, and headache tends to be more common with these products. And some scenarios, mesotherapy has been followed by faster alopecia, sometimes cutaneous infections such as non-typical, atypical mycobacteria infections also have been reported, which are more a side effect of a sterile precaution technique rather than the ingredient. And when we are using it with application of minoxidil solution, meaning doing mesotherapy, doing microneedling, and then combining the application of topical minoxidil, it tends to lead to frontal edema or injection site tenderness or slight nodularity. Contraindications wise, whenever we know that patient is having any other substantial medical history, we should not be using. And drawback wise, the main drawback is that it lacks standardization and it is more of a procedure which is used by non-qualified people, saying that they are using stem cell therapy and what not, and that is why it has fallen into disrepute. Coming to another procedure, microneedling, it is of various types, can be done with the base of home care derma roller, and lot of patients ask whether they can combine using a home care based derma roller along with their minoxidil application. It can be a derma pen, derma stamp, derma frac treatment, or we can do a simple microneedle delivery system which we use along with doing our PRP therapy. There are some derma rollers which are available which emit light along with the microneedling when it is being done. Microneedling works by the mechanism of increasing the angiogenesis, activation of the stem cells, and is widely used for alopecia areata as well as androgenetic alopecia, and it tends to help with both. The side effect wise, erythema and mild pain is common. Precautions wise, sterility should be taken care of. Now coming to the procedure wherein we are mainly working at and looking at camouflaging apart from looking at the growth. So once there is a certain area of baldness and we know that the camouflage also has to be done, scalp micropigmentation is the simplest of the medical tattoo application which can be done in balding areas or thinning areas. Once it is done on a completely bald scalp, it may not be showing that much natural results, and it is basically an adjunct to hair transplant and helps in any other causes such as surgical scarring or a burn scar or areas where it is difficult to implant normal density follicular-unit hair transplant can be done. So over there, it can act as a camouflage technique. The factors affecting scalp micropigmentation, of course, we have to look at the area of the involvement. If it is in the front, we have to look at the color match which happens with the hairs. Otherwise, the pigment bleeding, later on it's showing up as a Tyndall effect or graying of the hairs in the surrounding area can make it look unnatural. And it is a procedure which can be easily done with multiple micro tattoo needles, and full head in scalp micropigmentation can require up to 7-8 hours, or it can be divided into multiple sessions. One therapy which is somewhere in between a transplant and a PRP, wherein we are just not looking at growth promotion, is basically hair follicle stem cell therapy. And there are some certain patented systems which use this and is said to be more effective than PRP. And many times it is used as monotherapy where patient is not willing to do anything else. And we know the name by, it comes as Regenera Activa and some other names, wherein some hair follicle stem cells are taken from the androgenic alopecia resistant areas, and that is used as a combination or a hair follicle mesh along with the stem cells and injected in the frontal scalp area where the androgenetic alopecia is happening. Some people have also tried fat stem cell based hair loss therapies also. All these therapies are going to work when we don't have seborrhea or dermatitis, concomitant infections, or severe malnutrition. And many times these are common factors even in males, and they should be ruled out at every stage before we do. What I have not covered in this is hair transplant. So hair transplant, because it is a wide topic, so if towards the end, if the time would allow, I'll show you a video on that. Now, talking of the normal topical prostaglandins, which are the tentative research areas which can be used for hair fall or hair growth indicators, is bimatoprost, lenatoprost. These are prostaglandins, and in fact cetirizine also, which tends to show increase in terminal density. This is still at research stage, but if it comes in topical formulation and would show good efficacy, it would be a good idea. Similarly, we also have topical 17-alpha propionate, and this also is used for male pattern thinning. And the therapies like botulinum toxins, thread, which are still in the experimental stages, is what we talked about. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Ashim Sharma, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pradeep. I think that was a very, very enriching discussion. I do agree that it's a very, very wide topic, and it's very difficult to cover everything under one roof, but you've given us a very good overview.
Thank you so much.
So without any further ado, I welcome all my panelists on board who've been introduced at the beginning of the session. And we'll quickly move on to the panel discussion. Like I said, we'll follow 4 basic tenets: what to use, why to use it, how to use it, and when to use it. So first of all, and I'll be directing questions to one particular panelist, but anybody who has any other ideas can please feel free to jump in. So I'll start with Dr. Maya. Maya ma'am, the challenges faced with topical minoxidil. We have many challenges with it, which is why we have so many therapies that we use in trichology. But if you could enumerate 3 most common challenges that you face in your practice.
The one challenge is that most of the patients who come to us have gone to different places where they've already used minoxidil and they were not happy with it. So it's actually very difficult to convince them to stay on minoxidil even during our therapy. Number 2 is they all don't want to use a drug which will kind of get reversed when the drugs is stopped. So that is another thing. And the third thing is, I find in my practice is a hypertrichosis which occurs in women. These are the top 3 problems that I face while prescribing minoxidil.
So I think those are 3 very valid points, ma'am. Most patients have already taken minoxidil. That is, I think, a very far-reaching challenge. You rightly mentioned hypertrichosis, and you mentioned that patients always want a permanent solution. Anything which is temporary will definitely, put patients off. So I'll quickly move to the next question in the same breath. I'm going to pose this to Dr. Neeraj. Is topical finasteride a better alternative? That won't be a very good question, but do you feel that you need to combine both of them, or do you feel that topical finasteride on its own, we have standalone preparations now, do you feel they match up to minoxidil or they are good adjuvants? How would you position it?
They are good adjuvants. If you ask me, a dual combination is definitely, let's say, better. Yes, if you ask me, is topical finasteride a better alternative, then we have to think to what? Are we talking about minoxidil? Are we talking about oral finasteride? Are we comparing it to any other agents? But if you, but when you combine it with minoxidil, the acceptance is better. What I am seeing in my practice, so definitely yes, it's a better alternative. Alternative itself says everything actually.
True. So I think that's a very good
main.
Yes, that's a good point, sir. I think I totally agree with you. There are no alternatives as such in the field of trichology any which ways.
And one point which Dr. Maya made, when you stop minoxidil, the hair loss again occurs. So something like this during maintenance, you can use this dual combination. So generally what the theory says after a year or so of finasteride gel and minoxidil.
So since we
and
are
coming back to the previous question, the basic, if you ask about minoxidil, see what the biggest challenge which we face in our practice is compliance. And when you guide them, you have to apply it twice daily. It again becomes difficult, and the change of hair color and texture. This is the second practical problem. The rest of the things has been already mentioned by me.
So I'm glad you brought that point out. I think I want one more question on topical minoxidil. Dr. Rohit, So do you feel that now that 5% minoxidil once daily is recommended for female pattern hair loss, it's FDA approved, do you feel we should stick to a 10% lotion once at night for males or versus 5% twice daily?
See, I usually keep for maintenance 10% once at night for my male patients. To start with, I have also started my patients in combination of minoxidil and finasteride 10% on a regular basis for first 4 to 6 months. And once they get the desired results, I shift them to once at night only. It is very difficult, beat any preparation, whether it's a water-based preparation, lotion-based preparation now also we have, or the alcohol-based preparation. It is very difficult for a person to carry on to groom with applying minoxidil twice a day. So most of the patients who face it as a challenging thing to apply minoxidil twice a day, I shift them to once at night. And also nowadays, because people sleep late at night, so I usually tell my patient that as soon as you come home, you apply the first application, say around 7 p.m. And once before they go to sleep around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., the ones who sleep late at night, they can apply once at 2 a.m. and in the morning, they can just shampoo and go.
Interesting.
That's a very good pro tip. That's an excellent pro tip. I myself, I think, sleep at 2 a.m. So that would be my preferred time as well. It
goes with the half-life of minoxidil also when you talk about oral or topical.
So that is a very, very important point. Yes, I agree, sir. A very good point made by both of you that 5% twice a day, you cannot match it with 10% once daily. That's a very, very important point, which I wanted to convey to the panel. Now we spoke about aqueous versus alcohol-based minoxidils. Dr. Pradeep, what is your take on the same? Do you feel aqueous-based minoxidils are the same as ethanol-based in terms of effectiveness? Not efficacy we have proven in studies, but what happens when, is it as effective in practice as on paper?
Most of the times, yes, I find them equally effective. Very rarely, in very few patients, we would find, but that also is a important advantage. And like, even if the efficacy becomes little less, the acceptance is higher because the hair doesn't show up as very unruly and dry hairs. So patients who would want a well formed look, they are more open to using it in mornings when it is aqueous based or when it is in combination with some serum based preparations like Capexil and all, because that makes it easy to wear and go to office and not look weird. Efficacy, of course, also is, I find most of the times it is equivalent.
So any other panelist who has found a discordance between ethanol versus aqueous base, or is everybody unanimous on that?
See, I personally feel alcohol-based gives better results. I only use water-based when patient is having some allergy to the alcohol-based product. Okay, the absorption I personally feel is much better in those which are alcohol-based. Of course, the chances of itching, irritation, and allergies if the patient is having, then only I move to water-based products. I agree with Dr. Pradeep Kumari that the combination which have some peptides in them is better for those who want to use it twice a day, once in morning, because it helps them to groom properly. Otherwise, with the alcohol-based products, the hair just stick and it is very difficult to groom.
So I think that's a very, very good point. I do agree a combination does play a role. Obviously, since we are at combinations now, we've spoken about double combinations. Let's move on to triple combinations. Where do you position triple combinations in your practice? As a first-line therapy, or do you wait for a while with plain minoxidil, oral finasteride, then shift to that? I'll start with Dr. Maya.
I always wait to see results with just the basic oral finasteride and minoxidil. I wait for about 3 to 6 months, and only if there is no improvement, I go to this option, because I feel minoxidil is still the golden drug which produces increase in density, whereas all the peptides, they just produce terminalization of vellus hair. They do not produce new hair follicles. So I feel minoxidil is number one. This is only if they find that they are not happy with it, or if they want to see more volume, I go to these peptides.
What the other panelists, Dr. Neeraj, what about you?
Yeah, I'll come back to Dr. Pradeep Kumari's lecture. She made a very good point. There are two approaches. One is academician approach, and second one is the clinician approach. So of late, see, what ma'am is saying is totally, absolutely right. It's academician approach. Sometimes we become clinician also, and we are innovators. So I won't say the first line therapy, but Sometimes because when you see the history, they have already used minoxidil, they have used the other peptides, then you don't have much of options left with. Then it becomes the first line of therapy. Otherwise, we follow the same as Dr. Maya has mentioned.
Dr. Rohit, yes,
Yeah. See, when a patient comes to us, whether they have used minoxidil or not, we want to give them the best. We want to tell them that, okay, this is what we can do for you. We can get few hair that you have lost in, say, last 3 to 4 months also back. So it is always better to give the best, whatever maximum you can give on day one, so that you can get the best results out of your topical treatment. Also, counseling is a must. Many people will be averse with the idea of having a oral finasteride. So for them, I will just counsel them that, okay, we have a topical preparation also along with minoxidil, which doesn't have that many side effects as has been written on Google, because for them, Dr. Google is something much beyond the dermatologist they are consulting. So that gives them some confidence. Okay, if you are not eating, if you are not consuming the drug finasteride, so the side effects that I read at night on Google won't be there. So they accept that combination. So that's the reason I give topical combination of finasteride and minoxidil on day one only to my patients. Of course, as things improve, I shift 10% combination at night only.
Great. Dr. Pradeep, we'll finish with you.
I agree with Dr. Maya. So majority of the times it is plain minoxidil, but wherever I see that the patient is hesitant and he would not want to start minoxidil. So the point in time when we reach a stage where minoxidil has to be started and everything else has been tried upon, I try and convince them for minoxidil and topical finasteride formulation, because I know my energies are going to be like delivered on that. So it is fine to convince them for both preparations rather than one, because otherwise down the line we have to convince them to upgrade to something else also. So I try, if it is difficult, I try to start on a minoxidil and topical finasteride combination, so that it makes a case that okay, we will step it down as soon as the hair fall is under control to plain minoxidil. So that time they tend to agree. Otherwise, if the patient is not putting too much of resistance, it's mainly topical minoxidil alone. And patients who give history of irritation with minoxidil preparations in past, whether they have self-used it or otherwise, like 2-3 years back they have gone to a dermatologist, then it is minoxidil and peptide formulations.
Great. So I think we've heard 4 varied opinions and 4 very, very good opinions, because I think for trichology, each approach is a good approach, whether you have an academician's approach or a clinician's approach. I think we've discussed this dual versus triple combination. So I'll move quickly to the next slide. So is there a need for topical dutasteride? And as we speak, there is actually a topical dutasteride which has entered the Indian market as a plain lotion, but dutasteride mesotherapy has been going on for quite a few years, especially in Latin America. What is your take, ma'am? Do you think we need a topical dutasteride now?
See, if you have listened to Antonella Tosti, they were the ones who were actually resisting all this mesotherapy and topical drugs. She swears by topical dutasteride mesotherapy. She says that's the one which works when everything else has failed. So we are always in the practice of aping at the West. I think we initially start our resistance, we say no, no, and then finally we fall into their shoes. I think this is what is going to happen with topical dutasteride. Initially there's going to be a lot of resistance, and then when people are at a loss of a newer agent, everybody is going to start using this, and only time will tell. But as of now, it's on paper that it is supposed to help. When topical finasteride helps, why will it not? Why will not topical dutasteride help? It's just that our nature is to resist everything initially, and then when the whole world is using, and then we start aping them. I think that's what is going to happen with, that's my opinion. Let's listen to the others.
I think I actually agree with you, but I will put it out to the other panelists also. Any panelists?
Theoretically, I agree. Theoretically, it's much better than finasteride, and it's more lipophilic than finasteride. So that's why it's considered to be a better one. And secondly, I have experience of using this, as Dr. Pradeep mentioned in the presentation, in mesotherapy as a cocktail also. So definitely in the patient in which I was using dutasteride, it was working better as compared to all other agents. So I definitely feel there is a need of topical dutasteride, and it will definitely work. If finasteride is working, it will work.
Great. So I think the question is very clear. Actually, there were reports that even when finasteride had come actually 10 years or more than a decade ago, there were reports that penetration would be a big problem. But we have so many penetration enhancers nowadays that I think we can make any molecule penetrate. So Dutas
Also,
not have a problem.
also, Dr. Asim, it is a drug molecule. So if there is an innovation in drug molecule, we should welcome it, because otherwise we are left with highly unscientific products which are in the form of serum. So if you are willing to try that, why not this? And drug molecule always puts us in a position wherein we have scientific evidence, or it can be generated more easily rather than proprietary products where we are not even aware of the content.
True. I think it's almost like you had read what I was going to write after this. So coming from a strong drug molecule, a scientific molecule, to something like nanoxidil. Now I'm very confused. I myself want an opinion on this drug, because a few years back, I think 2012-13, when the drug originally came, they said it has a lower molecular weight, so it will penetrate on its own. But very recently, when I'm looking at another, OTC drug company which has come out with that, they claim that it has a larger size, so more cutaneous reservoir. So what is actually happening with the nanoxidil? Any panelist? Dr. Rohit, yes, I think you were
See,
saying.
most of the time, you will find minoxidil as a OTC product. Okay, it is sold on Amazon, and there they say that it has a higher molecular weight. When you read the research paper, it says it was a low molecular weight, and it can be absorbed easily on the scalp. It has a reserve of action. So this is what. But if you ask me personally, I haven't used it. But yes, few of my patients who were using minoxidil did bought this product online, but I guess now it is not available on Amazon also in India.
True. There is a company called DNC which imports it. I don't know. I personally also haven't used it, but they claim that
I think it's available on other portals actually. They do get.
Okay.
And, yes, there are and when you go through the literature of this compound, most of the studies are done by the parent companies. And only one study which is unbiased, it says we don't know, we have to wait, it doesn't work. So availability is an issue. And then if you ask about the this clinical trials has not been done with this compound. We are not aware of how exactly it works, whether it works or not, but theoretically it seems to be a potent agent.
Dr. Asim, I would like to add.
It's better than minoxidil, but we have not used it. So firsthand, we don't have any experience of that.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Rohit.
Dr. Asim, your first question about topical dutasteride, we have to take into consideration this also, that the reservoir of dutasteride in the body is much more than finasteride. Okay, and the side effect profile of this drug is much more than finasteride also. Okay, so when your patients are reluctant to use finasteride, it is very difficult to counsel them to use dutasteride, because they say that the drug might last as long as 3 months in your body after discontinuing this drug.
So, sir, I will argue with you on that, because there are studies. In fact, my own department had done a study. We had a thesis topic where we compared dutasteride with finasteride, and we found a very similar side effect profile, almost the same incidence. So the incidence was off by maybe 0.03 or 0.04%. So we do promote it when we give dutasteride as the same thing. But I do agree with you. A topical formulation, for example, for finasteride, we know that the cutaneous penetration is high enough, but the serum DHT levels also fall by about 25%. So we will have to see how it affects the serum DHT levels before we can kind of proceed forward.
But finasteride is FDA approved, dutasteride is not.
Agreed. All points taken, sir. Absolutely.
So see, nowadays, because most of our patients who come to us have used minoxidil and they know about finasteride, and you don't want your phone to ring late at night once the guy goes to Google and says that, okay, this is even worse than finasteride.
Yes, 100 times more potent than that.
That is something. The other day, Dr. Raghunath Reddy was talking about how the doctor-patient relationship is taking a hit. So if you are doing something good for your patient, also the patient will see the side effect profile. Okay, they won't see that, okay, something was not working for me and that's the reason why doctor has prescribed me. You have to be very sure that what you are prescribing, legally, you should be on a strong footing.
Agreed. I think those are points very well taken. So we move on to orals. What is your experience with oral minoxidil? Any or in fact all panelists, because everybody gives oral minoxidil now. So we'll start with Dr. Rohit Batra this time.
See, oral minoxidil, I've been prescribing it for around 6 to 9 months, and it is available as 2.5 milligram tablet. But I usually start my patient with 1.25, that's half tablet. And most of my patients are doing good on 1.25 only. I know of a dermatologist also who has been using it for over 4 months and has been getting good results with oral minoxidil. Maybe I'll start soon.
Great, great. Dr. Neeraj, if you remember,
I've just started using it since this last 3-4 months. So not much of experience, but one thing is there in 2 of the patients I saw pedal edema, which was not mentioned in Dr. Pradeep's, but that was transient. Then again, I have started, maybe we'll take more time to comment on that. But with the initial, what you say, the feedback is encouraging. But this requires a lot of counseling actually when we give oral minoxidil. For us also being a new agent, for us being in the practice, this oral, when it's something like when cyclosporin came, so we are also a little bit scared of writing initially. So that's not the first choice most of the time. But sparingly, I have started using. Let's see, maybe after 6 months, I'll comment better on that.
So I think Dr. Pradeep had mentioned sodium retention and peripheral edema in one of the side effects.
I think, right.
Yes, it does happen at low doses and also tachycardia.
We should also take it as an indicator of like, investigating for congestive CCF, congestive cardiac failure.
Agreed. Maya ma'am, your experience with oral minoxidil?
I've been using oral minoxidil for last 2 years. I was using it even when it was present as Lonitab 5 milligrams. I used to ask them to take quarter tablet. I think the selection of candidates is important. You have to select somebody whose blood pressure is constant, and somebody with no cardiac illnesses, and somebody who's willing to take the new drug. And I find it very useful, especially in women, female pattern hair loss. I find it very useful, except for the hypertrichosis, which occurs at a higher dose. And in men who do not respond to finasteride, it's an add-on drug. The combination of dutasteride and oral minoxidil in men, and combination of oral minoxidil and spironolactone in women do wonders in my practice.
Great, ma'am. I think those are good tips for anybody in the audience who has not started using oral minoxidil as of now. So the dose we've discussed in clinical practice, start with 1.25 and then move up. Any limitations you find, ma'am, apart from tachycardia and pedal edema?
Hypertrichosis, I think women after 6 months, they develop hypertrichosis. So it's hard to make them continue the drug, but at least for whatever period that they've used, they see very good results. And very few patients, I would say just 1 or 2 developed history of palpitations, but I always look them up for their increase in pulse rate. If it's more than 20, of their increase in weight gain of more than 2 kgs per month, I stop this. So, and ankle edema, if you just follow these, look for these side effects, you can manage your patients very well.
Great, ma'am. Those are great clinical tips for oral minoxidil. So I think we've covered oral finasteride in a nutshell, at least. Importance of counseling, definitely. I love what Dr. Rohit said. Post-finasteride syndrome is sprawled all over the internet. We know it's run by neither a dermatologist nor a urologist, but to convince patients of the same is very, very difficult. So I think hand-holding and reassuring is very important when you're giving finasteride, but notwithstanding it's FDA approved, there is a lot of legal backing on it. We have IDVL guidelines, ISHRS guidelines. So any of you who's scared of giving finasteride, I think you should go ahead. Any cautions or precautions to be followed while patients are on finasteride? Dr. Rohit, I can begin with you.
See, I just counsel my patient that in case they are planning a family, they should stop it. Otherwise, I don't see any problem. Of course, usually because most of the patients know about the drug and they have read about the drug. So as you talked about the finasteride scare and syndrome, that there is some loss of erection or other sexual dysfunction. So once I have given my patients for 3 months, after that, what I usually do is I ask them to take 5 days in a week and skip it on weekends. So it gives them that extra cushion also, that they are not taking on a regular basis. They get the results also, and they are happy also that, okay, we are not taking it on a regular basis.
So I think that's a good pro tip actually. That's a good practical tip. 2 days washout period and 5 days of medication. Anybody else? Any particular precautions that you're following or anything? Actually, there's a separate topic on how much to help patients when you're starting them on oral anti-androgens, but I won't be going into that. Just a simple pro tip.
One subgroup which I would like to mention, Dr. Asim, is females, wherein menopausal females, family completed tubectomy done females, where we are giving finasteride and the results are absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
So over there, because they don't have that kind of hesitation and it can be continued for long term. So in such females, assessing them for their general mammography, the slight risk of breast cancers and the other cancers, that should be taken into consideration, and we should advise them to go ahead and do a pap smear and a mammography on a regular basis once they are on the drug for long-term duration.
Yes, Dr. Rohit.
See, in females with female pattern hair loss, those who have completed their family, this is the topical is my first choice. I usually start only with topical finasteride and minoxidil. Okay, so they are happy. I just counsel them that, okay, you have a completed family, so no problem. You just continue with that and you get beautiful results with 5% minoxidil and finasteride combination twice a day. And none of my patients have complained of any other side effect with this drug. Also, in patients of hair transplant, post-transplant, finasteride we give. And in these patients also, those who complain, a lot of patients of hair transplant complain of seborrheic dermatitis afterwards, and they are reluctant to use shampoos on regular basis. They think that, okay, the transplanted hair will fall off. So in them also, I have tried oral minoxidil, and few of my patients who were suffering from seborrheic dermatitis and were having trouble applying minoxidil are now happy taking oral finasteride and oral minoxidil 1.25, and they are happy.
So great. I think that's a good combination. Dr. Pradeep, I'm going to quickly ask you, since you mentioned post-menopausal women, lots of studies, and we do end up giving higher doses of finasteride. Do you feel 1 milligram works equally well as 2.5 or even 5 milligrams post-menopausal, or should we always increase the dose post-menopausal?
Dr. Asim, if I have to answer in short, I will say I've never used 5 milligram in my practice, only 1 milligram. Very rarely 2 milligram means 1 mg BD. So I've never felt the need to give 5 mg to even a female.
So great.
Nice.
So Asim, I have never given 5 mg in post-menopausal. I've always given 1 mg and that works. And I agree with Rohit with the topical finasteride in post-menopausal. So that's a new thing, new addition to our, which works exactly.
Maya ma'am, do you give higher doses of finasteride?
I always start only with 2.5 because 1 has never worked in my hands for postmenopausal women, and very, very rarely have gone up to 5. But 2.5 is my standard dose.
So I think we have a divided house here, 1 versus 2.5 versus topical as well. I won't negate any of them because all of them do tend to work depending on what kind of hormonal imbalance we're facing post-menopausal. Very quick case scenario here. 28-year-old female with grade 3 Olsen. As you can see, only frontal accentuation mostly. No clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism. Management. We'll start with Dr. Maya.
See, this is a female. I would treat her with spironolactone, even though there is no hypoandrogenemia. Hypoandrogenemia is different from cutaneous hyperandrogenism. So spironolactone starting with 25 milligrams BD, I go up to 50 milligrams BD, and I add on topical minoxidil as well as oral minoxidil if needed. This would be my, of course, ruling out all other nutritional factors and stress and all that. If you have to ask me about hormonal therapy, this is a drug of choice.
Spironolactone and minoxidil. Dr. Rohit?
Minoxidil, I'll add PRP, and in case there is any history of PCOS, maybe I'll add mannostol and other supplements that we get nowadays.
So insulin sensitizers with minoxidil and PRP.
Yeah.
Dr. Neeraj?
I agree with panelists, but one thing which I'll add cyclical therapy with minoxidil and PRP.
So nutrition. Dr. Pradeep?
Mostly nutrition, and then Dr. Maya's protocol when it comes to adding hormone therapy.
So I think it's very interesting that you mentioned about spironolactone, ma'am. Even in the absence of clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism, we should, just like we give spironolactone for adolescent acne nowadays, not only adult acne, I think there are lots and lots of studies, and we should be treating them rightly. It's almost like you saw what I gave, ma'am. So I myself had given her oral aldactone, topical minoxidil, and PRP. I think I used everything. I used a combination of everything that everybody mentioned. But needless to say, patient had good results. So I think I still have the patient. So I think that's all that matters. So we'll take a quick break for audience questions. I'll be covering a few now and a few at the end. So even though this is procedural, I'll start with this because I am covering procedures right after this. How soon from after, and this is a question I have in my discussion as well. How soon post-COVID should we plan PRP for hair loss? This is asked by Dr. Radha. Any panelist?
See, this depends on the severity of COVID. You know, people have just mild COVID with no lymphopenia and no platelet disorders or blood thinning agents. You can start maybe as soon as the patient is back to normal. And if they are on blood thinners or if they have anemia or lymphopenia, I think you have to wait for reversal. And then it's based on the individual's COVID disease.
Agreed, ma'am. Actually, why this question is very popular. Dr. Rohit, yes, after you.
See, we have been seeing telogen effluvium in most of our patients of COVID. So it usually starts 1 to 1.5 months after they have suffered from COVID. So I would like to wait for my patients. I usually counsel them that, okay, you just got over with your COVID. So wait for 1.5 months or so. In case they are suffering from telogen effluvium, then I will wait for another 1.5 months because I don't want to just ruin their hard-earned money because initially they're going to see, and it will be very difficult to tell them that, okay, after PRP they are losing hair. So it is always better to counsel them, wait, and in case they have been suffering from telogen, I'll just give them some tincture or other thing, let the hair fall come to normal, and then only I will take for PRP.
Asim, there is no set protocol. What I do in my clinic, I generally say we'll do it after 3 months of when you have come negative.
3 months post.
Very basic, simple rule.
Dr. Pradeep, any
some patients who were already on PRP and got COVID, they pester because they see increased hair fall. So they would like to come as soon as they are COVID negative. So I've had patients who would come and say, no, please do it, doctor. So, but somehow we have pushed it to 1.5 months. That's the earliest for a couple of patients have done. But for most other patients, at least minimum 2 months. I'm talking of the patients who were already on hair-based therapies and then they ended up having more telogen. For patients who are having first time and our first timer patients, as of now, I've withheld doing PRP and try to look at the normal telogen, which can be passed on after a certain point in time of 2-3 months.
So I think they're all very, very good answers. I think I agree with all of you. There's another question, how to wean off oral minoxidil, how long to continue oral minoxidil? Any panelist? This is a googly. I think I'll take it if none of you mind. So essentially my HOD used to tell us that till the patient wants hair, till the patient dies, or till the patient has money, you continue whatever form of minoxidil the patient is taking. So I think that if any panelist has any other view on, weaning off of minoxidil or stopping minoxidil, then I would love you to take the point as well.
See, I just counsel my patient that, see, medicine can never be stopped. Okay, so I tell them that hair fall is a normal, natural phenomenon. The problem is the shedding hair is not coming back. So minoxidil makes sure that the cycle continues. So if you can apply minoxidil, good enough. If you don't want to apply, or if you have any side effects, then oral minoxidil. But something or the other has to be continued till the time you want hair.
Yes. We can do a rotational therapy, Asim.
Yes, I'll do that.
Minimize the chances of possibilities of any adverse effect. Give it for 6 to 8 months, stop, give it something else, then again come back to either finasteride or minoxidil. So this is, as you said, rightly said, this has to go for life.
Agreed.
If you want your hair intact, this is what the basic formula is.
And I think on the backdrop, similar questions on how long should finasteride be given and how long should dutasteride be given? Any panelist?
See, there are multiple clinical papers for finasteride. There are papers they have used it 5 years, 7 years, it is safe. But we all do see a plateau effect after a year. This is what I notice in my practice. I don't know what it is. So I generally give it for a year, then again a rotation, something else, as Dr. Rohit said. So we have to keep on rotating the agents you have with you. It's not to be given for life.
See, that day I was a part of one of the Canadian dermatologist group. They were talking about this, and they are also of the opinion that they give some window for the patient to do away with the drug. They don't stop everything, but yes, finasteride, there were some of the opinion that in a year's time you should give for 9 months. Few of them were doing 3 weeks in a month, and a few of them also pointed out that just like I do, that after you get the result, you give for 5 days, then 2 days over. But even if I'm giving for 5 days and I'm skipping on weekends, that I won't continue for long, maybe a year, 1.5 year, and then I will give a window for 3 months or so, and then I'll start again.
Normally, I counsel for a year, Asim. I say that we use it for a year, and then after a year,
But when it comes to topical, I don't stop.
I keep on using.
Yes, that's true. I think topicals, there
So,
should not be a limit for topicals.
And when I stop oral finasteride, I put the patient on topical finasteride.
So you convert an oral finasteride patient
Yes.
to topical finasteride,
Yes.
which is very well documented in literature also.
Yes, after a year.
So we'll move quickly to PRP. I want to keep this a rapid fire round. I'm going to show you all the questions.
Asim, with your due permission, I like to leave. We have other.
Yes.
Okay, even I need to
It's already 6:10.
Sorry.
Yes, I am aware.
Thank
you.
you, Rao.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Maya, thank you, Dr. Neeraj.
Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr.
Asim.
Bhakti.
Wonderful moderation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So Dr. Rohit, Dr. Pradeep, just us now.
Yes.
quick
We
rapid-
will wrap up fast.
Yes, we'll wrap up fast. So open or closed methods. I'll start with Dr. Pradeep.
Both, but mostly open.
Mostly open. Technique used for injection or mesoguns?
Injection. Dr.
In-
Rohit.
Injection.
Great. Any specific investigations you do before starting PRP or before doing it?
Very rarely in females, we do take care of the hemoglobin first, as in so that we rule out the nutritional. But otherwise, no, not specifically before PRP.
Rohit sir, what about you?
I do get a CBC done, and in case the patient is on blood thinners and all, then I ask them that it is better to avoid. You should first consult, and then only we will start with the drug. There is only one side effect that I have seen since last 6-7 years that I've been doing PRP. One of the patient developed swelling on the forehead after getting the treatment done, and that gave me nightmare. And I learned PRP from Dr. Kiran Godse. I had to call him late in the night. That patient he said that I have also not seen this before. But the patient settled by morning, and she's continuing still with me for boosters also. Never happened again.
I think, doctor, it is more of an idiosyncratic reaction. Rarely it happens. Over the years, I've heard dermatologists saying occasionally they've got it, but it is like rare, 1,000 into 1. In fact, probably lesser than that.
That was my 3rd or 4th PRP, so you can imagine.
And I have seen scenarios where it took long time, 7-10 days to settle, but the same patient didn't get it in the next cycle. So it is something similar to which we see in laser hair reduction, idiosyncratic, just the edema and the swelling which comes and settles.
Which is very transient. A commoner side effect is actually lymphadenopathy, which even initially when we were doing, we couldn't find a reason for it, but then we realized it's reactionary lymphadenopathy. It's now documented as well. We've discussed about post-COVID era and how to deal with them as well. So another case scenario, 34-year-old male. This guy now has grade 3 anterior Hamilton-Norwood scale, not on any medication at present. What would be your line of management? I'll start with Dr. Rohit.
See, I will start with topical minoxidil, say 10%, and I'll counsel the patient for oral finasteride. If the patient is planning for a family soon, then I will restrict that. Otherwise, I will like to counsel, and if it agrees, oral finasteride, otherwise a combination of two. Maybe after 3 months, I would like to take the patient for PRP, and that's it.
Dr. Pradeep, I think I know your answer, but
little bit different, simply because the acceptance of PRP and the non-minoxidil based preparation somehow in my practice is higher, and the resistance towards minoxidil is higher when I see patients, maybe more to do with the IT people we have here. So PRP and non-minoxidil based preparations. If patient is willing, then by second, third visit, I generally prep them to add minoxidil if they've not already started on that. And in this actually is a good scenario where hair transplant can be an option, because that gives them good coverage and good profile change. Of course, the hair treatment continues side by side.
See, most of the patient, when they come to us on day one and they have not taken any treatment, then they are reluctant to even being counseled for hair transplant. So slowly you have to build that rapport with the patient that, okay, now if you are not happy with this, then we can go to hair transplant.
Yes, doctor, I agree. Means, of course not, but many a times these are young patients. They come up with the query of hair transplant, and we have to convince that this hair also needs saving.
They're all
So
sort
it
of
happens reverse way also, that we have
They're
to convince them, okay, this will need saving even if we go ahead and do hair transplant for you.
True, but very important to counsel patients early on the difference between balding and thinning, and how balding can be corrected only surgically, but thinning we can correct with medicines. And no matter what you do, medicines have to be continued alongside. Mesotherapy, I think discussed very well. I'm going to skip it because we all have our own preferred solutions, and we all know that most mesotherapy solutions lack science. Only as long as we're doing it the right way, try not to inject mesotherapy. A lot of people do it, but try to use devices like an electroporation device or even your fractional CO2 laser, but try not to inject it because you have no legal backing if a complication were to occur with mesotherapy solutions. And for heavens, don't inject minoxidil, topical minoxidil. There are separate mesotherapy solutions for minoxidil. It's not the same as topical solution.
I usually counsel my patient against mesotherapy. I have done it in the past, but I usually ask them that it is always better to go for PRP. It's your own blood. We are taking your own plasma. So the chances of any side effects, because mesotherapy solutions usually cause burning also at times. And even when we used to inject, say 5-6 years back, it used to cause a lot of burning irritation. So I usually counsel my patient, it's always better to use PRP instead of mesotherapy.
Agreed. I agree.
Definitive therapies, yeah, I'm glad we're all unanimous on this. Definitive therapies first. So again, quick rapid fire round. Microneedling, your preferred device out of everything that I've shown. Dr. Rohit?
I have the derma pen, but I don't use much.
Okay. For hair.
Roller. If I'm using roller, not the pen. I find it more painful when it is the pen or the stem.
So manual derma roller is what you use. Yes. And what is the ideal frequency? Do you do it twice weekly or monthly?
No. We only use it at the time of the PRP delivery, apart from the injection. But as a separate alone microneedling, we don't do. As in, at least in my clinic, we don't do.
Understood.
Patients do ask that whether they can use at home.
Agreed. Dr. Rohit, do you do it standalone or you always combine it with other treatments?
Not standalone. Many a times when patient come prepared that, okay, with minoxidil, I have read on Google that there is something known as a derma roller that needs to be done. Then I counsel them against using it, because I tell them that how can you use the same roller again and again? The chances of infection increases. But if they say that no, then we combine it with PRP only. That's once in a month or 45 days, but not otherwise.
Not otherwise. I think low-level light and laser therapy also you covered beautifully in your presentation. I like the point that you made. If you're using LLLT, use lasers and not light. But obviously the cost goes up, many-fold. So these are just experimental treatments. Just your opinions in one line, yes or no. Threads for AGA, yes or no?
I'm not using.
No.
Rohit sir, I know you do a lot of injectables. Botulinum toxin for AGA?
No.
I do.
You do. Regenera, again, you had spoken about, obviously not to take any brand names and no conflict of interest, but they do claim that it acts, it's better than PRP because it has an extracellular matrix and progenital cell, something, like the stromal vascular fraction, which we're studying. But yes, when it comes to practice, we do find a lot of discordance between what is told to us and what actually happens. I had actually kept this for Dr. Maya because she sent me a slide today where suction-based deliveries are now coming into the foray. Any of you have heard of this? Not the hijama cups. I'm showing you a different photo.
That's why I was about to say that it has been there since long. It's just the scientific way of doing it, but no personal experience.
No personal experience.
No.
Same here. Camouflage again has been spoken about quite well. I will not be covering that, except for any patients where you give them hair systems first line. Any one particular situation where you would not want to make a patient go through any kind of treatment?
See, those who have undergone radiotherapy, cancer patients, there we prescribe them because it takes long and they want quick results. They are already depressed, so it gives them some improvement. And hair fibers, many a times those who are not reluctant to get a hair transplant done and are taking medication nowadays. Salman Khan promotes hair fibers, so that's the reason hair fibers have come up in a big way again.
So only one thing which is little different and I would want to mention is, of course, apart from the regular this thing, trichotillomania. I've seen females, trichotillomania, using hair systems wherever they started. They are able to come out of their habit also, and it gives them confidence also. So that is one slightly different indication where probably we can think of it. Apart from that, only unrealistic patients who come for hair transplant don't have donor area. That is where, or unrealistic expectation where they would want, okay, they have looked at the videos of hair system and confused it with the system.
I do something else for trichotillomania because see, trichotillomania is not all over the scalp. A patient will be having one patch, two patch. Okay, so I ask usually the females to wear a scarf most of the time, and I counsel their parents and their family that don't let her remove the scarf. And in males, I ask them to wear a cap, and I ask their parents and their family not to let them remove that cap. So even if they are trying to pull off, they will find the cap or so won't be able to, and it works in most of my patients because it is very difficult to put a wig or something on the head when you have hair at most of the places and only few patches are there of trichotillomania.
So doctor, I just mentioned it because like I saw one or two scenarios where they were using and they were comfortable.
No, you are right, but the thing is that I personally feel it would have been difficult with a full head of hair. How can you keep another thing?
Yes.
I think both of you stressed on that point. I like that a lot, that sometimes you can use these agents to reverse habit tics as well. That is such a lovely point by both of you. I really like that. That's a good tip. I've never used it, so I'll now try to use it in that scenario. Last scenario for the day, and I'm on to my last two slides before we wrap up. 32-year-old male on topical minoxidil, does not want oral therapy, does not want PRP. How do you manage this patient?
This is Dr. Pradeep Kumari's patient.
I totally agree with you. Dr. Pradeep, please take this forward.
I agree with both of you. So if this kind of scenario where we have very less likelihood of giving them a combable hair growth and that is what they're expecting, then they have to look at hair transplant because this is very minimal hairline. There is a lot of recession in the frontal hairline. So hair transplant would save the day.
Rather, if you will give any medical treatment to such a patient, they will be after you that there is no improvement with your medical treatment.
So, which is why I wanted, sir, today to be when to use what. Often we end up doing a lot of and giving a lot of unrealistic expectations, and then they definitely come and bite us where we don't like it. So, I will not ask you this. I will only ask you one question, Dr. Pradeep. Why should one know about hair transplants even if they don't do it?
The main thing is that if we don't know, then of course the quackery is taking precedence. That is the main reason we should be taking hold of this field. And also, of course, but because that many times patients are doing it at places where the dermatologist would have not been there, and we have to deal with the complications, the badly done hairline. And we should be aware that, okay, this is not a nicely done hair transplant and this can be corrected. So these are the main scenarios. Apart from that, we as dermatologists have to know when not to do it. So cicatricial alopecia, lot of plastic surgeons, because they're not very well aware of the pathology and they end up doing it, and then the patient lands up in a situation where it should not have been done in the first place. So we are in a better position to decide the yes and no of it, pre as well as post. So I think that is why it is important for everyone to have a hold over the subject.
Rather, I had a patient with alopecia areata who was given hair transplant by one of the plastic surgeons. Not to name him, but
So
Yes, that can be devastating.
basically because the pathology got missed, which a dermatologist would never do because they're so conditioned to look at the pathology first. So I think that is one big advantage we have, and we should take care of it.
So I think that's a very good pro tip for all of you who don't do transplants. You should at least know how it's done and you should know the process, so that when other badly done transplants come, when you have to revise something, at least you will know what went wrong and you will be able to guide people better. So last audience questions, we'll just take a couple of questions because of because we're already over time. Yes. So experience with growth factor concentrate, is it better than conventional PRP? Dr. Pradeep, I'm going to ask you this.
I don't use them, so that's the short of it.
Dr. Rohit?
No.
So I think it's unanimous there. I also agree with the both of you. And the last question is again on hair systems. We've already asked that. So I think we're going to move to the end. So I'm just going to conclude the panel now. Stay home points because we haven't really gone out. So no take home messages. Therapeutic need gaps are definitely there in trichology. Procedures will never be an alternative to medical therapeutics, but definitely a very, very good adjuvant. Alopecia is multifactorial, so treatment should also be in combination. Evidence-based learning is the only way we'll go forward, and what to use where is the key. And when used properly, you can convert all your Donald Trumps to Chris Hemsworths. I really sincerely hope you do that. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. I am very thankful to Dr. Rohit and Dr. Pradeep, and I'm very, very thankful to Lupin for organizing this knowledge-based session today. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Bhakti.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm sure this webinar would have benefited our audience, and the clinical pearls, I'm sure, takeaway home messages was very clear and it was helpful. So once again, I thank you, everyone. But before we sign off, I just have a couple of slides which my team would like me to take. Yeah. So this is the first of its kind Laliconazole based anti-dandruff shampoo in the management of dandruff and seborrheic dermatitis. Yeah, so it is Laliconazole plus ZPDO and salicylic acid. Salicylic, it has a dandruff has a, sorry. Studies have shown that Laliconazole has been 100% lower, has 100% lower MIC than ketoconazole, and it has a lower development for fungal resistance. Now, this shampoo comes with an added advantage of ZP2 and salicylic acid, which prevents flakes, itch, and recurrence. It also comes with an Aqualock base, which is a botanical conditioner and a water miscible base. So it is easy to apply and it does not dry your hair and scalp. So this is Laliconazole based shampoo, Lupizol ZS for you. With that, we come to the end of this session. Once again, I'd like to thank all the panelists and the moderator and speaker, and we look forward to more such scientific interactions with you. Everyone, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Lupin, and thank you, Dr. Aseem, for having us here today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dr. Bhakti.
Bye.